Hey everyone, this is Mark Treichel with another episode of With Flying Colors. As I mentioned in my emergency podcast earlier in the week, I've got an all-star team of ex-NCUA folks to talk about all things NCUA, but particularly focus on the recent announcement of Kyle Hauptman going to the PCAOB and what that might mean, what it might not mean. On my screen in the upper left, I've got Geoff Bacino. Jeff, how you doing today?
Good.
Doing good. And Alonzo, lower left-hand corner, how are you today?
Fabulous, man.
All right. And John McKechnie, lower right-hand corner, you good as well?
Yes, sir.
All right, guys. And Jeff, former NCUA board member, currently runs Bacino and Associates. Alonzo, former examiner all the way up to regional director at NCUA, currently works with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta. And John McKechnie LLC, helps credit unions negotiate the world of Washington, D.C. Anything else on your backgrounds you want me to you want to throw in there before we dive in?
You glossed over my NCUA tenure. I guess
Oh,
that
I
was
did. Well,
deliberate. But
yes, it wasn't deliberate. I called you all NCUA on the front end, but you were there during the corporate crisis and let's get more liquidity and Rome is burning stage.
yeah, I'm glad you didn't say I was responsible for it. But
I was
yes,
about to
I
say
was,
that are those two events not mutually exclusive, but they are.
I was on the Hill when the SNL crisis blew up, and then I came to NCUA. So I mean, you can draw your own conclusions, I suppose. But
Yeah, it's just the pendulum. So, guys, was it last week? I got a little birdie sent me an announcement of a press release that says, "Hey, this is," didn't even say anything. They just sent me that, and I saw Hauptman was leaving, and I thought, okay, what else did I miss? Who's coming, right? And then shortly thereafter, Kyle Hauptman and NCUA came out with their statement. And where's the statement here? To The brief statement said he's a appointment to the PCAOB. He says, I'm grateful to President Trump and Chairman Atkins for their faith in me and for the appointment to the PCAOB. Here's the sentence that says it all. I intend to remain in my role as NCUA chair until my successor is appointed by President Trump and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. As I read that there right now, I think the key word is intend. It's kind of like the word may. It's stronger than may, but it's not a definite. I'll throw that out there. But guys, so let's talk about what this means for the process, what it means for the Hauptman, excuse me, the Harper, the Otska lawsuits. Not necessarily who might be coming in because that's always a crapshoot. But who wants to dive in first?
All right, nobody raised their hand. I'll take it. First of all, this was not unexpected. Kyle's term expired back in August, and as I think we agree, you're not allowed to succeed yourself. So Kyle was going to be going somewhere else. He'd been rumored, as I know John and Alonzo and you, Mark, know, I've been rumored a couple places that he'd like to go. But the interesting thing about presidential appointments and politics, you don't always get to go where you want to go. So, as I said, not unexpected. I guess the next thing, obviously, as you talked about intend to stay, is what does this mean for credit unions and what does this mean for NCUA? And I think the first thing is obviously right now the president can appoint the chairman because the chairman's seat is the one that would be open. The other two, because of the Slaughter lawsuit and Todd and Tanya's lawsuits, I think they've got a hold on. I don't think they could. I don't think they can fill those two yet. Basically, because I contend if you do so and you lose the lawsuit, it creates a game of NCAA musical chairs. Because I would assume that if they win the lawsuit, that Todd and Tanya will be at 1775 Duke Street the next morning, saying, "Okay, we'd like to get back into our office." If you've already got two people in those offices, it's going to be, as they like to say, a little awkward. I think, as I said, it was kind of the natural progression. His term was up. It's a nice landing spot for him. I think he's earned it and deserves it. But then for credit unions, I think you need to get someone there as the chairman before he would leave.
I've been mentally dividing these appointments into kind of two lanes. The one that Jeff just described, where Chairman Hauptman would be replaced by somebody. So that's one lane. And then you have the other that involves the other two empty seats, just the way Geoff described it. And it's entirely, those two are entirely contingent on what the Supreme Court decides in the Slaughter case, which is really about this Humphreys executor 1930s obscure Supreme Court case that just really decides whether a president can remove independent directors or not. That's been rumored to be that meaning the Supreme Court case. It's going to be decided between now and June. Somebody who used to work for the Justice Department told me last week that they thought perhaps some more decisions would be handed down February 20th. So we'll be, those of us who do this for a living, or at least in an amateur way like I do, try to I'm gonna have to be watching the Supreme Court website on the 20th to see if any decision is made, but that'll start the dominoes falling. But back to the Hauptman appointment, it's Kyle has been serving in a holdover capacity. I don't believe he's ever said these words to me, but others on Capitol Hill who know him have said that he is a prime candidate for other regulatory positions. So this is a good one, and I think it's one that lends itself to a lot of the expertise he's shown on the board. Good luck to him in his next spot.
Alonzo, I have a follow-up question for you, but any thoughts on what we've said so far?
Ditto. I agree with both Geoff and John. I think that's going to happen. One thing I do expect, just to add to it, is that is the appointment for a replacement for Kyle any day now. So I think that'll happen. It may be waiting for that February 20th date that John, but I do expect it to happen real soon.
And then we hear the name, and then it goes through that whole process of getting vetted and Senate approval. And so let's go on the assumption that by Friday we hear a name. What does that mean for the arc of possibly getting that person in there so that they can be chair, so that Hauptman can go over to do what he's been selected to do? What are we talking? 90 days, 60 days, 180 days?
That's a very tough question to answer because the Senate has, it's always tricky and somewhat contentious, but the time frame is going to be very, very hard to guess. I wouldn't be surprised if nominees were not waiting until the early summer.
And then you get into early summer, the other two positions are up, and you could see, you kind of get into that. Does he put 2 R's in and not do the D, which you would never even, those words would never even come out of my mouth in a different administration, right? But in this administration, that's theoretically a possibility, right? 2 R's, and they just say, hey, we're going to skip the D. You could have all three come in, but it really is kind of a cornucopia of who might come when, how many might come. And Alonzo, so my follow-up for you as the staffer at NCUA like me, when I think of these things, I think about, the agency just went down to 27% of staff. You got one board member instead of three. When you have three, you got to count to two. When you got one, you got to count to one. But when that one's leaving, and you might have 1, 2, or 3 coming, and 27% of your most experienced staff left, and you have 11 acting directors when they issue, here's our leadership, and 35% of them say acting. I've kind of coined it as NCUA is a little bit in chaos, and it's good to get movement to where you might be going, but it just kind of adds to the unrest of staff. Any take on that?
Well, like you said, counting to one is a lot easier, particularly when that one's been here for a while and you're kind of in sync with him already. And he set his tone, and it's not significantly different than what it has been from a staffing level, except fair lending, maybe that lane. But I think it's steady as you go. I think NCUA is adjusting. Definitely, the reduction is not only a reduction, but it's a reduction in places that you least could afford it, if that makes sense. And that's one of the dilemmas. So I really think you had a expertise gap right now. You get up to speed, everything is fine as long as the economy remains stable, if you will. I think that's a big deal. As long as your larger credit unions remain stable, if you will. So all that being said, I think it's steady as you go. You just keep on going. Interesting thing, of course, with Kyle is, as you know, his chief of staff is a key component as well. So, that's one of the, maybe Geoff and or John, if with Sarah Bang there, I think that's very important for continuity purposes. So, if I were coming in, particularly as a Republican, I think she's a key component in whether she'll stay over or whether she's going with Kyle. So those questions have to be answered as well. But I think just from a staff perspective, you're feeling with Kyle there or not, that talent drain right now. But you already got a floor, so you know where it is. It's just keeping going there. But I am hearing that the expertise is not the same.
You're hearing some of the same things I'm hearing and experience. Yeah, I get that. And on the Sarah Bang concept, it's kind of like when Mike Frizzell departed and Mark McWaters came in and Sarah Vega transitioned, creating a political appointee position where there was some holdover and helping educate, because these board members are bright people when they come in, but sometimes they have to learn credit unions, sometimes they have to learn credit unions and how NCUA works, sometimes they have to learn those things and how government works. So that's a good point. Geoff, John, any thoughts on what Alonzo added there?
I actually went back in the history books and looked at the very first 3-member NCUA board, which was seated, I think, 1980. And you mentioned, Mark, a minute ago that you could have the 2 Republicans and no Democrats. There actually has been a situation where the other party, if you will, has not been represented. First board had 2 Democrats and an independent. The 2 Democrats, of course, were Larry Cannell, who was the former banking supervisor in Connecticut, a guy named P.A. Mack, who was the chief of staff to a Senate Democrat, and then a guy named Harold Black, who was a professor of economics in Tennessee, who was an actual independent. So you didn't have any Republican representative on the first board. I'm not saying that's healthy or good, and I wouldn't condone it. And I think a balanced, mixed approach is better for everybody. But it's not completely unprecedented to have one of the parties completely shut out of the board. Like I said, I hope that by the time we do another one of these to celebrate 4th of July, I hope we have a 3-member board, and it's got 2. And I hope it's got 2 R's and 1 D, because that's sort of the way you expect it when you have a Republican in the White House. But I know you don't have us on this podcast to say I don't know, but I don't know. I will say that I'd be surprised. Here's a prediction. I'll be surprised if, when the Senate decides to have hearings on nominees, I'd be surprised if they don't have the nominee for NCUA's chair sitting next to Chairman Hauptman when he's testifying about his new role. So in other words, they move in tandem, I would guess.
That would be nice for the NCUA person, right? Because they're not the main meal. They're more the appetizer then.
They always do. They'll do unless it's somebody like the Fed chair or the Secretary of the Treasury, they'll do a whole bank of witnesses.
Yeah. And not having opinions, you reminded me of my favorite. I shouldn't mention them because they suck. The Minnesota Vikings podcast, where every Thursday they do reckless speculation, right? And the same guys have a Minnesota Timberwolves podcast with reckless speculation with Giannis Antetokounmpo, and I know I probably just said his name wrong, coming from the Bucks to the Timberwolves. But my reckless speculation is that when we get to a board, there's either going to be 1 R, 2 R's. I'm not contemplating the scenario I see where there's 3. The reckless speculation is that Todd and Tanya win their lawsuits and Tanya comes back. So that's my reckless speculation at 7 in the morning on Thursday, if it's Thursday.
That's a smart prediction. That's always possible.
That's my Hail Mary. All right.
So John mentioned, if you don't mind, one quick
thing. Yeah, absolutely.
I know ideally it works. I think these places work best with 2 of the party in power and 1 of the other party, or 3 and then 2, whatever the breakdown is. I think that the party crossover is important. Having said that, over the last couple of years, you could make a case that if you control the Senate, you really don't have to worry what party someone else is. In other words, if I say I'm a Democrat, and the White House is okay with that, and the Senate's okay with that, then I'm a Democrat. I mean, I've made this statement before. I mean, what if Donald Trump Jr. was a registered Democrat in a New York primary? Is he a Democrat? You know, I'd say absolutely not, based on everything else. My point is the kind of chaos you were mentioning earlier in the administration and the NCUA could lend itself to someone saying, look, here's your 3 board members. You know, in the Senate, if you got 51 votes right now because of what Harry Reid did years ago, you can approve all 3 of them. And again, the only really safeguard that you have that someone is a party of the other power is the White House and the Senate. And since there's really no way for anyone in the Senate on the Democratic side to stop anything, you can nominate who you want. Having said
Jeff, by the way, Jeff lives in a state where you don't have to register by party. So, Jeff, if you say you're a Democrat, I believe you. If you say you're a Republican, I believe you. You say you're an independent, I believe you. I'm in a state, Maryland, where you have to register by party, so they know. All my neighbors know who I am.
But John, if there were a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, and I had enough ties, I could pawn you off as a Democrat. I know something you may not want to be pawned off as. Who's going to stop it?
Right. That's great. Great
So,
observation.
again, there's your reckless prediction that you nominate 3 of the same party, or you don't nominate anyone that's a Democrat. But either way, I think the best thing for credit unions and NCUA is to get this put behind them. And I think the first step is obviously to get someone to replace Kyle. He gets to move on, and we get to move on as well.
Makes good sense. Go ahead, Alonzo.
Just to give you my thought, and again, my thoughts are more on a regular continuum, if you will. And number one, I think if I were a betting man, I think the person who will be nominated for Kyle's position will be a credit union person, if you will. It won't be a person we don't know. That's my prediction. Does that make sense? So it'd be an insider who knows credit union, somebody who's been in credit unions, if you will. When we get back to 2 R's and 1 B, and this is my personal opinion, I think one of the dilemmas that anybody had is when you have a former chairman who now becomes a board member, Todd Harper. I say that because I wouldn't want that if I were the Republican. If I were coming in as a new chairman, I definitely wouldn't want the former chairman on the board. So I say that because I wouldn't mind Tanya as the 3rd person. So I could see that scenario coming up to compromise, if you will.
That's an interesting take. That's better than reckless speculation. And of course, the former chairman who's led the agency, who knows how the trains run, who knows that what authorities the chair has, and maybe how the other board members can throw kinks in that, and knows where the bodies are buried, is a different person to contend with, power wise and just understanding wise.
I'm going to violate my own self-imposed rule and say I have an instinct. This is counter to what Alonzo just said. Although when Alonzo says something, I tend to give it a great deal of weight because I think he actually knows what he's talking about, unlike myself and maybe Jeff. But I think this might be somebody who the Trump administration already knows and has appointed to something else. I'm not sure if they know or care if it's a person who's from our industry. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's somebody out there in the credit union world who is a very connected Trump person, but something in my spidey sense tells me it's going to be somebody who they know more than someone who we know. That's just a guess.
Well, and sometimes people come back, right? Debbie Matz came back, Rodney Hood came back, and so there could be, when you go back at that chart of who's been here, who's been political appointees, you can kind of look at a list and maybe come up with some names and go, aha, they might know this person, they might know that person, and without getting into specifics, of course, but you can look at those tea leaves and say, hey, maybe that makes sense, and it could make sense.
Well, John brought up the initial board at NCUA, and again, if you look at almost everyone up until a couple years ago, it usually consisted of people who I don't want to say didn't know credit unions, but if you go back even as far as someone like Ed Callahan, Callahan was the Department of Financial Institutions head in Illinois, knew credit unions. But after that, then you've got to go the next one up would have probably been Bob Swann, and then Dave Chatfield, and then Dennis Dollar, myself, Gigi Highland, Metzger to a degree, and then it just kind of stops. Okay.
Well, didn't Frizel have some kind of
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Yes,
right.
Frizel was the Department of Financial Institutions.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, I pointed this out maybe during our last call or the one before that. The board, right before the Trump administration fired two people, that board was made up entirely of former Capitol Hill staffers. Okay, which tells me that that an NCUA appointment, which used to be kind of something people either took if they didn't get something else, a la Roger Jepson, but very few people, as I said, you take, Callahan, Chatfield, Dollar, me, and Gigi and Mike out of it. You've got people who really didn't know the agency. And Mark and Alonzo, you guys talk about when someone comes in, they don't know the agency. I think it's going to be interesting to see, that if this trend kind of continues, because where Kyle is going, the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, that thing was created, make sure I'm right on this, John, with what piece of legislation was that?
It was not Dodd-Frank. It was
Oh,
one. I think was it HERA, the
oh
home.
no, I thought it was the one with the SEC stuff. Anyways, my point is, I looked at that position when I was at the finance board, but everybody then had all come from the Hill too because they know it was a great place to go. So my point is, moving forward with NCUA board nominations, are they going to start to become people who just understand that they're there and coming from the Hill, which again, great knowledge, but very limited crediting knowledge, or will it start to be a little bit more spread out the way it's been in the past? I mean, I would take the board I was on. You got Dennis Dollar, CEO from Mississippi, Yolanda Wheat, Harvard and Stanford trained lawyer, and me, who's been in creditings in some form for a while. So it's an interesting thing, and I will just digress into this, Mark. I hope I don't step on your line here. If it were to change to where the president has the ability, in other words, if the White House wins the Slaughter court case and he or she, whoever the president is, can fire board members, it's going to set a real issue in place. Number one, as to whether someone would even take the job.
Sure.
And more importantly, number two, would someone take the job with, say, a year left in a president's term? In other words, if that goes through and they try to fill a slot in this administration, people, okay, Trump's leaving in 2028 and it's 2027 or late 2026. Do you want, if you're from out of state, do you want to move here to take this job knowing you could be out of it in January of 2029 if a Democratic president comes in and says, you know what, see ya? What's going to happen, I predict, would be every agency on January 21st of inauguration year is going to be like, okay, see ya, you got to go. And that's going to create some real havoc. And as I said, it will create some trepidation on the part of people who might be very qualified and want to do it, saying, it's not worth it.
It's going to change the pool of who's interested, no doubt, right? Yeah, one way or the other.
Yep.
I wrote down a couple words here so I wouldn't forget them. But John, I saw you. Did you have any thoughts on what Geoff just said? I thought no. Okay. And the PCAOB being a good place to land. When that little birdie sent me a note saying, "Hey, look where Kyle's going," there was some reasons also put as to why it was a good place to go, and that was the difference in pay at that place versus being a board member at NCUA. But in this, so I got my Google machine out and I saw that they reduced the pay for the board members there by between 42 and 52%. So as good as the job as it used, as good as it used to be, it's about half as good as it used to be too. So yet it still pays more than what the NCUA board does. So that popped into my head. And then Geoff, when you were talking about if you have control of the Senate, so the light bulb that goes on in my mind then is, okay, so between now and midterms, there has to be some sort of resolution. Or no, midterms won't impact it because that's the House. So never mind. So it's a long game, right?
Yeah,
It's a
no,
longer game.
John will tell you you've also got control of the Senate. I don't think the Democrats can win it, but it is up.
I think they're going to pick up seats, though. I think it'll be a closer margin. But I think a lot of this is going to be resolved before November. I'd be surprised if it weren't.
Got it.
I agree with that.
Very good, guys. So what else around the edges of this particular topic do we want to chat about? And if nothing there, the general state of affairs of all other things NCUA.
Well, I'll give you a segue to that. I wanted to mention, I made a mental note to myself. We're on the cusp of the time when the NCUA has to revisit the interest rate ceiling. And you now have Chairman Hauptman's appointment, and you also have the recent stir about interest rates, initiated by the president's tweet in favor of a 10% cap. I just wonder, I actually like everybody else's opinion. This all seems to kind of mix together now in a very interesting fashion. You wonder what kind of pressures there are going to be about resetting the policy, especially if the chairman now has an eye. He's not 1 foot out the door, because he's pledged to serve in a full capacity. But you just wonder how everything affects everything else. It's like Earl Weaver used to say, everything changes everything, right?
And 3-run homers.
Right. Pitching defense, 3-run homer. Yeah.
That's interesting. I have a couple thoughts on the interest rate thing, but Geoff, Alonzo?
Agree. One of the things I'm seeing, in my opinion, is right now with that one-person board, the items coming before the board are, for lack of a better term, pretty non-controversial. Paying board members for daycare, stuff like that. The interest rate ceiling is not non-controversial, so that'll be interesting to see if it's a one-person board, whether you do that. I think either John or Geoff mentioned earlier that anything approved, obviously, under that one-person board, it may be subject to a lawsuit. Am I remembering correctly, gentlemen?
But I've made that assumption before.
I think so.
And I think John had backed.
Yeah, I think that's very, very good observation, Alonzo.
Well, and we'll go ahead.
So, I don't know when the interest rate ceiling comes up.
March.
But that would be a timeline that you try to get at least one other board member.
It'll be March, and you assume maybe they discuss it at the February board meeting if there is one.
Well, and I'll say on the interest rates, and I'll preface this with I'm paraphrasing, and this is roughly correct, but putting my executive director hat on, in order to maintain it at 18, you have to be able to look at the period in time since the last time and either reference stability or instability or rate increases of some sort. Because I remember one time a big discussion where rates had only gone down, yet they wanted to keep it at 18 for obvious reasons. And they had to cherry pick like a 2-week period where rates blipped up as their argument to comply with the act. So adding that flavor to what might need to be done there is one thing. And then general comment, what we're seeing is mundane on the agenda, but what's happening by notation vote on reorgs and things is huge, right? And I've talked about it here, that I hear rumblings that offices are disappearing, going away, this spot's moving over that spot, yet they're not talking about it publicly, which I think is a bad precedent. And I think and I'm going to get up on a soapbox here, there's been a general trend over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years to do more by notation vote and do less in the sunshine. And that's not good. And then going back to the chaos of staff, right? You've got staff lost a lot of their leaders. Staff knows this might be going away, this might be going away, but we're not saying it publicly. And then you get, that whole acting thing, right? When a third of your directors are acting, you tend to, some people take actings and say, I got this job, I'm going to do it, darn it. Others say, hey, I'm just a temporary, I'm the third string quarterback. When the starting quarterback gets back, they're going to they don't want me to screw it up in these 2 games I'm going to play. Maybe we can win one, maybe we can lose the other. So that I threw a lot on the table there. Any thoughts on any of that?
Still waters definitely are running deep at the agency. Like you said, the board meetings are not that full of melodrama and action and a lot of substance in terms of new regulation. But yeah, I've heard the same things. I'm sure the other 2 gentlemen on the call have heard a lot from their friends at the agency. There's a lot of reshuffling and movement around and uncertainty. But I've said this, I think when you had us all together last summer, I think I had a moment to say that the basic blocking and tackling of what the agency is doing seems to be going, from what I hear from credit unions, the exam process continues to move. People are still angry at their examiner sometime and not angry other times. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is the main mission of the agency is continuing to be fulfilled. Obviously, to Alonzo's earlier point, as long as things stay stable in the economy,
Yeah.
things are going to be fine. But yeah, I think a lot of the internal, I've heard some of the uncertainty about the internal machinations has started to affect morale in some spots. But I also notice a lot of people just have gone out the door, so it's not their problem anymore.
Very true. I said in my emergency podcast, don't worry, it runs itself, right? Because there's these delegations of authority that establish, which is equivalent of the Bible of what you can do, what you can't do, and that's the blocking and tackling. And even though, every time I talk about losing staff and the challenges of losing all that corporate knowledge, there's a lot of great people at NCUA that are now going to have new opportunities. There'll be some efficiencies that come out of it. And hey, when you tell a credit union you're going to have 30% less examiners in your room for 2 weeks, net, that's viewed as a positive, right?
Well, you talked about the notation vote. I got to tell you, I will give you 110% backing on that. I hated notation votes, and when I was at both NCUA and then at the finance board, I would really fight like hell to say, look, unless it's fairly harmless and something that's easy to do, I always wanted us to at least discuss it in front of the general public. The last NCUA board meeting, John and I were the only civilians there. We were the only non-NCUA staff, I think, if I read the room
That's
correctly.
true.
But you are right. They're going to have to start to do some non-controversial stuff, and whether that's Kyle or his successor, I think it's important that you start to set a precedent that, yes, other than just taking reports and doing some kind of easy things, that the chairman's going to have to, I think, make some tough calls. And with the interest rate ceiling up in March, it looks like he or she, if it's not Kyle, is going to have to make that call. I guess I would say, man, I hope it's Kyle, because if that's the first thing you've got to do when you take the job, it's going to make for a tough first week. I mean, you guys know what it was like to kind of train us board members. It was not always easy. And that first couple of weeks, it is literally drinking from a fire hose as to what you can't do and what you know.
Well said. Well, guys, we're running up against our clock. Final thoughts. Let's start with John in the lower right-hand corner here.
Well, I think that, again, we've laid out and a lot of the uncertainty. I mean, the uncertainty has been the watchword here at the agency for almost a year now. Uncertainty doesn't necessarily mean instability, but I mean, because I think that things continue, as I said a minute ago, to function. I think that here it is, early February. I think by the spring, we're going to start seeing some certainty, at least when it comes to appointments. I think the interest rate ceiling issue will have resolved. Who knows? There are always jokers in the deck. Who knows what surprises are going to come? I will say that on the other side of the house, where I do a lot of business on Capitol Hill, credit unions have been very, very, very focused on the credit card issues and how the president in 2 tweets essentially put all the focus on credit card, the 10% interest rate cap, and then the Credit Card Competition Act. So those are things that are taking up a lot of oxygen in the congressional sphere.
Got it. And Alonzo, last thoughts?
Yeah, just on the reduction in staffing, and I got to say this. I think I think the adjustment period will, and getting staff up to speed, I think it's happening right now. One of the disappointments that I had, quite frankly, when NCUA brought out merit, was it was automating efficiency tool, and the agency did not become more efficient. So basically what I say is we got the data faster, NCUA got the data faster, got more of it, but instead of reducing or looking for the efficiency of it, the agency more so dug deeper, if that makes sense. So instead of it, you got a more efficient digging where we were. So now we can dig deeper. Don't think that was necessary. So I think the reduction will actually put the efficiencies in place as intended. And you take out the reputation risk part of it, it just will accelerate it, if you will.
Interesting. And the thing of merit that I think they could fix going back, where Aries was better than merit was the checklist that they shared with credit unions. They kind of put that more in a black box, and some of that transparency left. Geoff, final thoughts.
I guess, as Kevin Bacon said at the end of Animal House, remain calm. Exactly. And I just figured that, pretty soon I think we're going to have a new chairman. And then I think shortly thereafter, once the slaughter case is decided and ruled upon, then I think you probably follow the other two after that. Frankly, the back of the White House always continues working on these. If it's like this White House, like any others, and I can't speak for it, but they're always working on the nominations and appointments. They know what's open. They know what's ready. They're talking to people. Ideally, they're prepared for what would happen if they win the case. What name or two names do they have to send up? I guess I would echo what John and Alonzo said, and that is, look, the agency is, I don't want to say running itself, but I think they're continuing to do a good job because I think they know what they have to do. The things we're hearing are kind of under the surface. And frankly, I just think, I think some of this got to give some credit. You got to give credit to Kyle and to Sarah, for basically understanding, okay, this is our job now. This is how we keep it going. And I think whoever the next chairman is, ideally, I know we kind of made mention is to bring in Sarah along the way that Frizzell and McWaters did with Sarah Vega. Maybe it's just in the name, you succeed yourself. But I think having someone that, if it's not someone who knows credit unions, it's imperative that they have someone who knows credit unions coming in, because it's going to start day one for whoever takes Kyle's place.
And just one more thing, Mark, the agency is blessed, for lack of a better term, to have Larry Fazio and Kelly Lay up in the executive director's spot now. Those are folk who came, like me, like you mentioned, who was an examiner and came all the way up through the ranks. So they know the agency from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, there's a lot of corporate knowledge in that office, which can help run the triage of how do we rebuild from the 27% down. And my last thoughts link back to something John said, jokers in the deck. My dad played cards a lot. He played poker. He played all sorts of other exotic games. And when we were sitting around the table, he had this funny line that I always remember. If you asked him what was wild, he said, "Nothing but the dealer." And maybe in the dealer, as we circle back to the board, maybe the dealer's Trump in this instance, because what he does can be viewed as wild, right? So
that's great.
All right, guys, thank you so much for your time. I know that we wanted to get this done quick, and I appreciate you accommodating schedules to record this. I'm going to go finish my coffee. Have a great Thursday. I'm going to get this episode out today, and we'll get together soon. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
You got it. And listeners, watchers, thank you for watching. This is Mark Treichel signing off with flying colors.